Hello, Palladium fans. We're here today with another retrospective on people who made Palladium books and Kevin, who he is today. And today we're doing a discussion and a remembrance of the late, great Erick Wujcik. I don't know that we're going to get through all of our notes in this single episode because there is, as you said at the top of our notes, there's so much to say about Erick. So, Kevin, I'm just going to turn the floor over to you.
All right.
Give us an introduction to Erick, and then we'll get into it.
Well, to me, and there's a great image of Erick that we've published and is available as a print as well. To me, Erick was a big teddy bear. It was funny because he was like 6'2" or 6'4", and kind of a not overweight, but kind of a big bone guy. He always reminded me of Tevye from Fiddler on the Roof.
Okay.
In part because he always wore this leather fisherman's cap, especially the first 20 or 30 years that I knew him. In fact, I remember adventures that he and I went on trying to find a place that could sew him a new hat when his old hat was falling apart, because he had bought it in Spain at some point and loved it and like wore it constantly, much to the chagrin of his longtime girlfriend. And he had this dark brown, almost black curly hair and that beard. And I guess a lot of people were intimidated by him, I think, from his smarts and from his size. And I just always thought he was a sweetheart, just this big teddy bear. From day one, he just was this great guy. He was just so genuine and open and honest. And he was just, I don't know, just a great human being. I and lots of other people who knew him would agree with this, that he was a bona fide genius. He just really was, and especially when it came to game design. And people often comment about the depth of his and my games and the respect we show when we're talking about other cultures that we write about. And I think that was one of the things that immediately bonded us. We had that in common, where we want to always, whether it's an adaptation of a license like Ninja Turtles, or whether we're talking about China and its history and its culture and its mythology, we want to capture that and present it the way it is. Not just take some ideas and then just kind of run with them. And it was funny because when we did Ninja Turtles, and then he wanted to do Ninjas and Super Spies. We talk about this in the Ninja and Super Spy episode. So we get this amazing Jim Steranko painting, and this is back in a day when you couldn't scan stuff. We're talking 1980. So I'm holding in my hand this magnificent painted cover by Jim Steranko. And it's got all this Asian stuff on it, and it looks more like an Asian spy type thing. And I'm not thinking about it. I'm like, Erick, you love Japan. You know all kinds of things about samurais and ninjas and that kind of thing. So you should do a book. You should do a book on ninjas and super spies, and then we can do this. And this cover would be great for the source book, Mystic China. And he's like, Kev, I know a lot about Japan, but I don't know that much about China. You can do it, Erick. It'll be easy. And I didn't know till years later that while we were doing a podcast, in fact, where he's like, yeah, I knew nothing about China, but Kev was so sure I could do it. I said, okay. And it was his research, and I do mean copious amounts of research. Oh, yeah. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books. And he went to Wayne State University and got into their private archives. And same thing with U of M archives and, stuff that you could go in and read, but you couldn't take out. And he got so into it, he just fell in love with China and its mythology and its people and its culture, to the point where he would go on to live there for like 15 years.
Yeah.
He got work at a Ubisoft studio, and then he was like an adjunct professor teaching game design in Hong Kong. And it was like, wow, of course he is.
Yeah.
And that's just like the tip of the iceberg with Erick.
My favorite story from when we were talking about Erick is we were going through the early days of Palladium Books, where he was working at like a computer lab and you were doing laundry, and that, at late at night, and that's when the two of you would call and have your discussions about game design and game theory. And
well, actually, it was so he worked at the Detroit News, and he was writing an article for them, but he was also their IT guy. And he had to take care of they're talking computers that were like the size of these shelves.
Yeah.
Back then, right? Because I got the tour, and I'm like, wow, this is something like out of Colossus. And he's like, yeah. And because Erick was a very tech guy. He loved science, loved knowledge. In fact, he never got his college degree. He was always just like a couple of credits away from it, but went to college for like 15 years because he just loved learning, loved all this stuff. Like I said, he was this amazing guy. He was Mensa. He was just this brilliant guy. And so he worked at Detroit News, and all he really had to do was press a few buttons here and there. I mean, there was a little bit more to it than that.
Yeah.
But, so it's like, Kev, I just got to set it up, and then, if you call me after, because he started at like 11, call me after midnight. I got like 5 hours that I'm just bored. I just read or write and I'm like, okay. So we talk for like 3 to 5 hours back in the day when I would stay up all night for years and years. And then when he needed to do his laundry, he decided that the laundry he was going to do, this laundromat he preferred supposedly, was in my neighborhood. So I'd get a call and be like, Kev, I'm going to do my laundry. Let's meet up. So, we'd meet at, noon or 1 or 2 or whatever it was. And we'd be discussing game mechanics in the laundry. And people would be like, why are they talking about Aberrant Evil? Maybe we should get these two guys, wide berth. That was great. And, so anyways, Erick was just sort of this, I asked before this interview, I talked to a couple people who knew him, and I said, what must I say about Erick? And they're like, I don't know, just, he was just this laid back, warm and friendly guy. And it's true. And he just had this great smile. And I often said that Erick was a true bohemian because he loved artwork. He loved storytelling of all kinds like me. He loved movies of all kinds like me. He loved games. And, in my mind, he kind of went on to become sort of like the Johnny Appleseed of gaming, where he would run role-playing games at, if he had the time, at the drop of a hat. Someone said, gee, I never played, whatever. I always wanted to try D&D or, Palladium Fantasy or whatever it was. And to be like, let's do it. Let's do a game. We got 5 people here. And it'd be like, what? And he's like, I got dice in my backpack. Of course he did.
Of course he did. Right?
He always had his backpack with him. And of course he always had dice. And if they were game, he would sit down with them and to show them how to roll up characters and give them a quick, introduction and start role playing.
That's awesome.
And in fact, because back in the day, we actually offered royalties to our main writer. So Erick was getting royalties on Ninja Turtles. And Erick was not a big, neither Erick nor I, we're not like, we need fancy stuff. We need a sports car. We need when we go to a convention, we got to stay in the finest place. No, we're like just, down and dirty gamers, right? So at one point, Turtles was making so much money, Erick quit his job at the Detroit News and said, Kev, I'm going to go backpacking across Europe for like the next 2 or 3 years. And I'm like, what? Don't worry, I'll be in touch. And he went backpacking through Europe, starting in Spain, because when he was a little kid, I forget what his dad did, some kind of engineer. And Eric spent like the first 5 years of his life, maybe 6, in Spain, to the point where, according to him, he could speak Spanish better than English when he was a little kid. And his parents thought, well, this isn't so good. And then his dad had an opportunity back in the States, so he moved back to the United States. So he wanted to go back to Spain. And Eric is actually of Armenian descent.
Okay.
So he wanted to go to Armenia and Germany and Poland and England and the Netherlands and wherever some maniac would say, sure, you want to, you would like to stay at my house and sleep on my couch, and payment will be you'll run nonstop games for like Friday through Sunday. And Eric would be like, yeah, what do you say? And of course, he's reaching out to people who already knew online or through correspondences, but not always. A lot of times it'd be like people he'd meet, and he'd be like, yeah, you got a spare bed? You got a couch? I'll run games all weekend. And they'd be like, yeah, Erick Wujcik, you're going to run games for us all weekend? So I always thought of him like the Johnny Appleseed of gaming. We just kind of wandered the land role-playing, showing people how to role-play.
That's amazing. Now, we covered how Julius introduced you to Eric, but you mentioned last time that Eric was just starting a D&D game when you met him and was like, no, you have to play. What do you remember about that very first Erick Wujcik D&D session?
Well, I mean, I remembered him being very entertaining and being an excellent game master. Mostly, and this has nothing to do with Eric, mostly I was like confused because I was totally new to role-playing at that point.
Yeah.
And, or pretty new. And I'm like, huh, what? Do what? Oh, okay. But, he was one of those guys who was really like into giving you clues and having puzzles that you had to figure out.
Yeah.
So there were all kinds of puzzles and things. He was really into puzzles and maps and mazes. And in fact, if you weren't sitting there drawing the map, when you came to play next week, if you didn't have that sketch with you, it's like, yeah, you don't know where you're going. And I'm like, didn't we go straight down there? Did you? And it'd be like,
I thought we did.
Exactly.
I think you and I talked a little bit about this offline, but like Eric's Defiler-esque campaign, at least from the stories I've heard of it, was the Dragonrite campaign. And some of the elements of the Dragonrite campaign made it into Palladium Fantasy and Rifts. But you didn't actually play in the Dragonrite campaign, and that's sort of kind of been lost to the sands of time.
Well, I do have some notes buried someplace.
Okay.
On Dragonrite. I would have to dig them up. So Dragonrite was something he had introduced. So Eric had run a D&D campaign that went for something like 27 years.
Wow.
Until the day he died, right? He was running that game. And Dragonrite was something he developed because all of us, we all digressed from true D&D very early on. So it was like a D&D-ish game with a lot of original new material. So yeah, he came up with Dragonrite for his own D&D game, and then he just loved it so much he wanted me to have it so it'd see print, because I think he knew he'd probably never get around to doing anything with it. And so he gave me Dragonrite and gave me some of the basics. And like I said, I actually have like I want to say it's like 5 or 8 page history of Dragonrite someplace.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, and we've introduced bits and pieces of it in various Palladium games and in their gods and dragons and gods.
Yep. My first exposure to it was Rifts Atlantis.
Oh, there you go, Rifts Atlantis. Yeah. Yep. So He would do that a lot. Like same thing with monsters and animals. And I keep meaning to add them to the credits. And somehow whenever we go into reprints, I never remember. But Eric actually came up with the Endroth. Those were also in his D&D campaign. And so were the Max Perry and the Yema and the Zavor, which are all kinds of weird little creatures and undead things. And then he loved the Wolfen. Eric and I were both into history and loved, the Roman Empire. Yeah. From a historical point of view. They were very interesting. Their culture and methods, and they were one of the great ancient civilizations.
Right.
World conquerors, and he loved the fact that I had given the Wolfen like Roman attributes and kind of were following the Roman way of things. He just loved that. And he loved the canines. So he came up with the Kinkerin as like the tough little sort of, people of the forest kind of thing, and how their scars were like badges of honor and that kind of thing. So that was cool. And then he obviously contributed to the Wolfen.
Oh, yeah, and Adventures in the Northern Wilderness and further Adventures in the Northern Wilderness.
Yep, which later became the Wolfen Empire.
Yeah.
But, yeah. So that was cool. I'm trying not to go into too much depth and detail on a lot of this stuff so we can cover. There's so much.
There's so much to cover. This may be a two-parter. And tossing that out there.
Yeah, I mean, he was just this amazing guy. And one of the things that we were like the muse for each other, because I would call him up with an idea and he'd give me tons of feedback and, be like, Jeff, you can do this, or have you considered that? Have you read about this? And I'd be like, no. And he'd like, I'll send it to you, and vice versa. And in fact, it was funny because years later, I'm talking to a mutual friend. And she was telling me how, Eric was just so taken by you immediately. And I go, really? What do you mean? And she goes, are you kidding me? He would tell all of us, you got to meet this kid, Kevin. Because Eric was like 5 years older than me. And, when you're young, it's like dog years.
Yeah.
So even though I was in my late teens, no, I guess I'd be in my early 20s. 5 years, even in your 20s, it's a big difference. And I was this kid. I was this nut-nosed kid who had a lot of ideas. And one of the things Eric loved, and I loved about Eric, was that everything gave us ideas.
Yeah.
So we would just mention this or that, and the next thing you know, we're talking about how that could apply to a game or to a new character, or and oh my God, we talked about so many things and explored so many ideas that many of which never went anywhere. In fact, I think I've mentioned this in one of my other interviews, where there'd be lots of times where Eric would come over and we're both blabbermouths and have a million ideas, right? So, a typical short visit would be, 3 hours. And a long visit could be 6 or 8 hours. And Eric would finally leave to go home or to his girlfriend, who he had told he'd see her at 5, and it was now 11 in the evening. And, thankfully she was very patient with him and me. And, Marianne would be like, so did you guys work out this or that? And I'd be like, yeah, I forgot to even talk about that. And she's like, well, did you guys talk about the next book that you've been talking about? And I'm like, no, not really. I mean, I think we mentioned it, but she'd be like, you're talking for 8 hours. What did you talk about all that time? And it's like, we talked about this idea. Is that going to be another book? Nah, it doesn't work. What else? We talked about this. So is that going to be part of this new book? Nah, that doesn't really work either. And she's like, well, but it just generated ideas and excitement and enthusiasm and stuff that we would include later, but And a lot of it just went nowhere. It's I used to call it mental masturbation, because it'd be exciting just to explore some of these ideas and where we could possibly take them. And then at the end of it, it's like, nah, that'd be too complicated, or that's too much like this, or too much like that, or nah, it doesn't make a standalone book, but maybe you can incorporate it in, some future book.
Yeah.
And that's the great thing about ideas.
Yeah.
Never really thrown away. They're still kind of hanging out there in the ether. And that's what I always tell writers when they're working on a manuscript. And I'm like, okay, so you have this great idea, but it doesn't work because it either slows down the pacing or just doesn't make sense. It's too jarring. And you have to take it out because you have to know how to, weed down your games and give people the essential stuff. I said, but don't think of it as like you're throwing it away. It's not like you're taking a piece of paper and crumpling it up and throwing it out. It's on your computer. Just put it in a idea follow or notes file, and it's there for you to grab and utilize whenever.
Oh, that's why I always tell new GMs that, like, don't force your player to go towards this great encounter, but don't throw it away, because with a simple little bit of reskinning, that thing's going to come back around and be usable some point in the future. There's no such thing as wasted prep in my mind. Like, it's always, even if it's a dead end, I've at least pruned that idea out. And
well, the thing is, when you're being creative, whether you're designing something for your players or whether you're, writing a book or a game or a source book, even if you hit a dead end and it's stuff you throw out, or it's genius, pure genius, but it doesn't fit and you have to take it out, it's okay, because that rest of that idea, that adventure, that book might not have happened if you didn't go through the process of figuring all this stuff out.
Yeah.
And that's why it's I think people, because I get a lot of times when our books are late, because they're always late, and Erick was the worst of the worst. It'd be like, but why is it taking so long? And what I don't think a lot of people realize, you don't just sit down and go, I got this great idea, and then you just type away madly, and in 3 days it's done. And you go, yeah, Eureka! I've got the best source book ever. I wish.
Yeah.
No, sometimes you just have to really plow through the stuff, and sometimes you have to rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it, and until it's just right. And Erick was especially bad with that, where he was like his worst critic. But also it worked out great that we had each other as sounding boards, because we could go to each other and say, hey, what do you think of this? And be like, I don't know if it quite works. What if I did this? I don't know. Have you considered? Well, maybe, and back and forth. And then a lot of times it isn't even just that kind of banal. It's like, we would get so excited. That was the hilarious thing about me and Erick, is that we'd get each other so excited. I wish there was a videotape of that, and there sort of is, but I've never seen it, and I don't know how to track it down. So there was some point, and Erick was just this great network. He knew everybody. I don't know how the hell he met this guy, but he would talk to everybody. I mean, we talked about in Julius' interview how Julius is sitting there reading some book, and Erick's the guy who walks up to him and goes, hi, how you liking that book? And because he had already read it, of course. And then they just start chatting, and the next thing you know, they're talking about games and gaming and comic books and everything under the sun. And Erick tells him about, the Wayne Wargamers and this other stuff, and boom, we got a relationship building. And Erick met this videotape guy, and this guy was putting together at the time, it's sort of like what YouTube has become, and sort of what these are. Yeah. Erick had met some guy who wanted to put together some DVDs where he would interview these integral people in the history of gaming. And he had a whole bunch of guys already, and he wanted to get Erick because of Turtles and Amber Diceless.
Yeah.
Erick was like going to be one of the last interviews. And Erick's like, no, but if you're going to do me, you got to do Kevin Sembita. or he always called me Kevin Ciambata. You got to do it with Kevin Ciambata. And it's like, the guy's like, oh, yeah, okay. So we met at the Palladium office. And the guy does Erick's interview separately. I wasn't even near it. And then he comes and does mine. And then he says, yeah, I would like to interview the two of you together and with some other questions. And we're like, yeah, sure. Yeah. And there's a point where we're doing the interview and the guy's like, oh, no, I ran out of tape. I've got to, I got to get, oh, my God, I hope I have more. And we're like, yeah, it's okay. We'll wait. He goes, no, you don't understand. You guys individually, you're very interesting. You're great speakers. He goes, but together, there's this energy, this unbelievable energy, and I don't want to ruin it. Let me. And he was digging around to find another tape, and finds it and plugs it in, and we continue. And I never realized, because Eric and I were both, pretty passionate about gaming and energetic, and I would hear a lot about both of us how, oh, we really love it because you guys are so down to earth and you're so enthusiastic when you talk about the things you guys are writing and doing. And it's like, yeah, of course, because we love what we're doing. And I would love to have seen that if he actually captured it on tape. I would love to have seen, like, because when you're 100%. Talking to someone, you don't really see that dynamic because you're part of the dynamic.
Yep.
And I would love to have seen what other people would see, because when Eric and I would do panel talks and stuff, we'd get standing ovations, and people are like, that was great, and we're like, thanks. But I would love to have seen it when we were just, especially at the Palladium offices, because we just cut loose. And I'm sure we were talking a million miles a minute, and just these ideas were flying fast and furious. And yeah, I always wanted to see it. And the guy was like, yeah, I'll send it to you, and never did. And then I've lost touch with him over the year. I don't even remember his name or his company's name, nothing. It's gone. Man. So, yeah. But that was me and Eric. We were like two dynamos. And when you put us together, it was just, I guess, just a fireball of energy and something to see, apparently.
Well, one of your, we covered this in a previous episode of the History of Palladium Books, but the two of you were kind of influential in getting the Detroit Gaming Center off the ground, kind of spinning off of this, like the energy that you guys brought together, you kind of dragged everyone else into your orbit.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. So, as I had mentioned, we were kind of shuttled around the Wayne State campus to whatever space was available. And one was that kind of creepy song shop, which was like something out of a horror show. Like if you turned a corner and you saw Chucky, you wouldn't be surprised, right? Or Jason or Michael Myers. It'd be like, yeah, of course he's here. Yeah.
You would be surprised because they were there to kill you, but yes.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like, it's just a creepy space. Of course they're there. And so when Eric had the idea of doing the Detroit Gaming Center, I don't know if we actually had the title yet, but, to do some kind of gaming center, I immediately was like, yes, we should do this. And he's like, yeah, Kev, will you help? And I'm like, of course I'll help. And yeah, Eric and I are really the guys who kind of put the whole idea together and then kind of pitched it to some other people and enlisted their aid. And then Eric and I were the guys who ran around trying to find a space. And of course, only two idealistic dreamers would see this dilapidated, and I mean dilapidated, building with, this kind of tore up 10,000 square feet of kind of office and whatnot that used to be a methadone clinic, and go, yes, this is the perfect space. But it was. The only other place that looked pretty good, but it was way out of our price point, was like a dentist office. Because
Oh,
it had
yeah.
all these small rooms where you could put in a table, and it was perfect for your typical gaming group of 4 to 6 people plus a game master.
Yeah.
But this methadone clinic had a similar thing where it had some larger rooms in addition to a bunch of small rooms. And we're like, this can be the library, and this can be the lounge, and this could be a big giant open gaming area, and this could be some, special event room, which turned into my room because I had
The
26.
filer room. Right. Yeah.
And so every Saturday night that was off limits to everyone but us. And yeah, it was amazing. And poor Matt Ballant, one of the other founders of the Detroit Gaming Center, Matt, I don't know if he had worked at like a carpeting place or was just handy, but he knew how to lay carpet. And he put together a little team that was going to lay out carpet across the 10,000 square foot area because, like I said, the place was kind of shabby, and very rapidly those assistants disappeared, and so Matt ended up carpeting all 10,000 square feet of the gaming center almost entirely by himself. It was crazy, but we had a low budget, we didn't have a ton of money, and and then Eric came up with the idea of having a board of directors. And we brought in 2 of the guys from the Detroit Metro Gamers. That kind of came later because I think that was just sort of strategic politically because they were the big deal in Detroit gaming. And Eric in particular was afraid that they would see that us as competition trying to muscle in on their turf, which we weren't. We felt like, hey, there's enough space for everybody. And they were more suburban, even though hence the name Metro Detroit Gamers. They were more like all the outlying things, and their conventions were held at Oakland University, which is 30 miles outside of where we were located. And so we brought them on board for the expertise and to help, smooth things over so they didn't think we were trying to take over their turf. And it was great. The Detroit Gaming Center was awesome. Eric was a major draw. I was a major draw. There were actually several great games. Renee Vega was a big draw. Johnny Hill, the guy whose original D&D games we infiltrated and did not enjoy. And he was a great game master. And the Detroit Gaming Center was amazing because we got to see all these different styles of gaming. So, and you also got to see whatever came out that was brand new, right? Because someone there would have bought it and brought it in. So, and there was a hobby shop in, I forget whether they're in Ferndale or Royal Oak, called Greenfield Hobbies. And they were also Greenfield Hobby Distribution, which was a pretty major distributor back in the day, back in the 80s and early 90s. So we could order anything that we knew we wanted, and they would bring in all kinds of different stuff, and we would know when they're bringing stuff in. So Eric or some of the other people from the gaming center would go and, what came in this week? And, they'd go through it and like, oh, this looks really interesting. Can we buy this? So it was just this great, I always referred to the gaming center as like this hothouse environment where you had all these people and different, these beautiful different flowers that are people with their own, unique take on everything and appearance and aroma. And, it was just great. It was just this great environment.
That's awesome.
So, and I think it really helped Eric. I think it really helped me. Eric was able to, all of us were able to try out whatever new ideas we had. And Eric always had millions of them. In fact, everyone who knew Eric, their only real complaint about Mr. Wujcik was that he had all these great ideas for these amazing games. None of them ever got done. I shouldn't say none, a few. Amber Diceless happened, and of course Ninjas and Super Spies and Ninja Turtles and Eric's contributions to various other Palladium products, but because I was able to wrangle him. But and none of us are perfect. So Eric had his demons,
Oh, yeah.
And part of that was he was manic depressive. His dad was too. And Erick tried hard not to be as extreme as his dad. I think Erick was very self-aware and very empathetic to others. So he would always try to be there for people and help bring out the best of them. I know he certainly did with me. Because Erick was the first person outside of my immediate family, my mom and dad. You never, at least for me, you only take what mom and dad say at a grain of salt. Of course, they think you're a genius.
Of course they love you and think this is wonderful.
Yeah, they're your mom and dad. At least if you have a good relationship.
Yeah.
And Erick's relationship with his dad wasn't so great. So I remember one of the first times Erick came over to my house. I was still living at home, and I was working up in our attic with no heat and doing Judges Guild art. I felt like something out of a frickin' Dickens novel.
I was going to say, like, that's very how Dickensian of you.
So, I had a little space heater, and I had, the gloves with the cutout fingers.
Yeah.
But anyways, Erick met my mom and dad, and he's like, you don't know how lucky you are. You have a great mom and dad. And I said, yeah, I do. He goes, no, you don't. And I'm like, yeah, I do. He's like, no, you don't. And as I got older and started to see more of, his relationship with his dad, I met his dad, and his mom's a sweetheart. And other people who had much more tumultuous relationships with one parent or both, I'm like, oh yeah, Erick's right. I got two freaking amazing parents.
Yeah, people in your corner. Yeah.
But Erick was one of those people in my corner. Mm-hmm. Because when you grow up poor, people are, and you're an artist, especially in the 70s and 80s, artists were not as respected and revered as they are today. The whole nerd culture, didn't exist. Nerds were losers and geeks, and, at best you were a brainiac, but that wasn't a good thing either.
Yeah.
And so, in short, basically, if you were into gaming or comics or reading or art, you were kind of an outcast because you're a freak. I remember I was reading a novel on lunch break in high school, and someone came up and was like, oh no, is that a book that we have to read for school? And I'm like, no. They go, what do you mean no? And I'm like, no, I'm just reading it for fun. You read for fun? And I'm like, yes. And the guy grabbed a book and threw it and, told me what a loser geek I was. And I'm like, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So, I got a lot of that, especially in a city that's, sort of blue collar car culture. And then because I was poor, people, someone once said, talked about the crushing weight of low expectations. And so I would have these big ideas, and I think that's what Erick liked, because he was always a big idea guy too.
Yeah.
Like the gaming center, like everyone said, oh my God, 10,000 square feet. Are you insane? Just get a little 1,500 square foot shop someplace. And we're like, what? No, we can't do anything that we want to do with a tiny little space like that. And so right off the bat, Erick and I hit it off. And I mean, we were like instant brothers, right? And Erick was one of the first non-parental people who was super supportive. He was very impressed by my art. He was a couple of my first art jobs where he hired me to do art for this or art for that.
Yeah.
And, he got me to believe in myself and make me think, make me realize, I should say, that, I was actually smart and had great ideas and could do all these things. My mom and dad were great on that front too. They were like, you could be anything you want to be, and we're so proud of you. And I'm like, that's great, but your mom and dad.
Yeah.
And then Erick was sort of this revered figure among everyone who knew him because he was so smart and was Mensa and knew all this other stuff. And so, and by contrast, I always felt like I was an outcast among Muggles. And obviously that term didn't exist back then, but I really related to it when I read about J.K. Rowling's and the whole Harry Potter series and Muggles. And Alex, my best friend Alex, who's been working for me for a gazillion years, we always refer to the average person as normals, and we weren't normals.
Yeah.
And you didn't fit in. But worse than that, you just never knew. Come on, it's hard to gauge your self-worth, your teens and early 20s. You're trying to figure out what you're doing in life. And, Erick was amazing because we talk about everything, philosophy and history and you name it, we talked about it. Science and movies and comic books. It's crazy, very eclectic. And one day we're just talking about stuff, and I was telling Erick how, well, I'm not smart like he is, and he's like, "What? How can you say that?" And I go, "Because it's true." And he goes, "It's not true." And I'm like, "Yeah, right." And we talk about various things, and he goes, "Kev, you are one of 3 people who I consider to be my true equal," which blew me away. I'm like, what? And he tells me who the other 2 people are. One guy's dead. And I'm like, wow. And that gave me a ton of self-esteem and confidence. We just supported each other like that all the time. And I don't think we had any secrets, and we revealed stuff to each other that, you probably wouldn't tell 99% of other people out there. And, we shared our dreams and our hopes and desires and fears and foibles and everything else. And so, yeah, we were super, super, super close. Best friends for sure.
Well, I got one question, and we'll wrap up part 1 of this retrospective here. Did Erick play in the Defilers campaign? And if so, who did he play?
No, he never did. He would stand and watch it for 20, 30 minutes at a time because he was fascinated by the way I gamed. Because I ran, like I said, we had all these different people and all these different styles. And that's where, I often say, look, role-playing is very personal. We all run it different. We can all play D&D. We're all going to run it a little different.
100%.
Or even a lot different. And that's okay. And so he was pretty fascinated by the way I ran stuff. And we would talk about it all the time. And he would hear, stories afterwards from Julius and other Defilers about what great game it was. And that's where Erick was like, Kev, you write the best villains of anybody. And I'm not even just talking here at the gaming center. I mean, comic books, novelizations. And I'm like, well, I don't know if I'd go that far, Erick, but he's like, no, they're great. They're the best villains ever. So that was one of my fortes. And then one of the things that amazed him is I would give people tons of information. Where Erick was, like I said, he's into puzzles and traps. The
mystery, and
giving you clues. And like half the time, I don't think you were sure what you were going up against until you opened the door and there it was. And, my guys would be like, well, what can we find about this guy? And I'm like, well, he's at least 9th level. And, he's got these henchmen. And I would describe the henchmen and at least give them, they got this guy's, and there'd be cool, scary names, right? Because I write the best villains around, right? And Erick would be like, I don't understand it, Kev. They know everything. And yet they're still scared. There's still all this excitement and suspense. And I'm like, yeah, because they know all this shit and it's scary. And so now they're like in their imaginations, they're building up what to expect and how tough are these guys going to be. And we better have this tight plan when we go in to attack him. And we should take out his, at least these 3 henchmen first if we can, and that kind of thing. And they would just spend a lot of time just gathering this information and trying to be stealthy and not run across the bad guys or their henchmen. And it was just a different approach. One's not necessarily better than the other.
Right.
Or just different. So he was always fascinated with that. So I played in a few of his games, but not too much. And he did play in a couple things. He play tested. Obviously, we ran a whole bunch of play tests with Turtles.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was in a play test for Heroes Unlimited with me, and of course Ninjas and Super Spies I was in with him, and then I was a Champions game with him for a while. And
oh, that's awesome.
So it's, and of course he would always want to play test his ideas. Oh, so yeah. I played numerous, and he had all kinds of great ideas. Like there was a caveman game, and an alien invasion game that made Paranoia look like garbage. No slam on West End or Paranoia. Yeah. Before that'll be a meme. Kevin says West End is garbage. I didn't mean to say that, but Paranoia, got all these accolades, and Erick's game was true Paranoia, and yet a ton of fun and tons of humor in it. So, but he never frickin' finished it. A couple of his friends want me to try to finish it, and I don't know if I can do it justice. And plus, I don't have the notes. One of his friends had tons of notes, and I made photocopies of it all a few years ago. But
yeah,
I don't know. It hangs in the back of my mind as something I should consider doing, but I don't know.
Well, Kevin, thank you so much. Next time we're going to delve into all of the games that Erick did work on and touch. Section 57 through Amber Diceless. I remember playing Amber Diceless. I read the series of Amber specifically because I heard Erick was going to be doing an Amber Diceless game. So thank you, Kevin. This is a wonderful look at Erick and everything that he meant to you and to gaming.
My pleasure.